The heavy damask curtains were drawn, but she could still feel the weight of the afternoon sun pressing against the glass. This was her life, trapped in a house of suffocating beauty, married to a man whose devotion was a velvet-gloved hand over her mouth. She clutched the cold metal of the service staircase doorknob, her knuckles white. She had to leave. She didn't care about the jewels or the title. She just knew that if she spent one more day as the Duchess of Blackwood, she would cease to exist. But as she pulled the door open, a shadow fell across the landing. His voice, always so gentle, cut through the silence. "Serafina, my love, where are you going? The tea is getting cold." The Blackwood estate was a masterpiece of Georgian architecture, a sprawling stone leviathan set in the heart of the mist-shrouded countryside. To the London society pages, Serafina Harrington had secured the match of the season. She, the daughter of a minor baron with dwindling finances, had married Alistair, the Duke of Blackwood, a man of immense wealth, quiet charisma, and a reputation for being intensely private. 6 months into the marriage, Serafina knew private was a polite word for isolated. "I had a new pianoforte delivered from the Broadwood and Sons workshop in London," Alistair said that evening, his voice smooth as he spooned soup at the impossibly long dining table. "I know you are fond of music." Serafina forced a smile. "That is very kind, Alistair." "I am always kind to you, my dear," he replied, his gaze unwavering. It wasn't a statement of fact. It was a reminder of her debt. Her father, Lord Harrington, had been a fool, a gambler who had staked their family's name against the shrewd whispers at White's Gentlemen's Club. Alistair had swept in, a saviour, paying off every last shilling. The price, unspoken but absolute, was Serafina. Her life was a perfectly curated, silent performance. She had gowns from the finest modistas on Bond Street, jewels that weighed her down, and a library filled with leather-bound books. But she had no one to talk to. The staff was overseen by the iron-willed housekeeper, Mrs. Grayson, a woman whose loyalty to the Duke was so complete it bordered on religious. "The Duke prefers a quiet house, Your Grace," Mrs. Grayson had informed her on her first day. "He finds idle chatter distracting." Alistair's love was a physical presence. It was in the way he would appear silently in doorways, watching her read. It was in his soft-spoken requests that she not walk in the damp parts of the garden, or that she avoid the draughty west wing. He didn't forbid her from going to London. He simply explained with heartbreaking concern that the city was filthy and rife with consumption, and the very thought of her falling ill would shatter his peace. He didn't chain her. He simply removed every reason to leave and every person to leave for. Her first attempt at escape was pathetic. She'd merely tried to walk to the local village 3 miles away. She hadn't even reached the main gate before a footman, breathless, had caught up to her. "Your Grace." The Duke was worried. "You forgot your parasol. He insisted I fetch you with the carriage." She had sat in the carriage, the parasol a useless prop in her lap, and realized the truth. The footman wasn't there for the parasol. He was there for her. The estate, for all its rolling hills and beautiful vistas, was a prison. And Alistair, her kind, attentive, loving husband, was the warden. Serafina began to study the estate's routines with the focus of a general planning a campaign. She learned the delivery schedules, the changing of the groundskeepers, the moments when Mrs. Grayson was occupied with the ledgers. She found a small, overlooked corner of the garden, a ruined folly overgrown with ivy, where she could be truly alone. Or so she thought. One crisp afternoon, she was startled by the sound of shears. A young man was pruning the wild roses. He was new. He had kind eyes and a face free of the manor's oppressive gloom. He bowed deeply. "Your Grace, forgive me. I did not mean to disturb your rest." "You are not," she said, desperate for a simple, unguarded conversation. "What is your name?" "Rowan, Your Grace. Rowan Finch." They spoke for only a few minutes. He talked of the village, of the coming fair, of the gossip from London. It was like breathing fresh air after being locked in a tomb. He treated her not as a fragile duchess, but as a person. When he smiled, it was genuine. "The roses are lovely," she said, touching a white bloom. "They're hardy," Rowan replied, meeting her gaze. "They fight their way through the stone. They're determined to be free." The implication hung in the air between them. Before she could reply, a chill fell over the garden. Alistair was standing on the terrace, watching them. He wasn't frowning. He was perfectly still. That evening, the atmosphere at dinner was electric. "I find myself concerned, Seraphina," Alistair said, meticulously cutting his roast beef. "About what, Alistair?" "Your spirits, you seem restless. I have been thinking." He paused, placing his knife and fork down with perfect precision. "The gardens are not a safe place for you. The ground is uneven. You could fall." "I am perfectly capable of walking in a garden," she said, her voice tighter than she intended. "Of course you are," he soothed, his voice dripping with condescension. "But it is my duty to worry. I love you too much to see you harmed." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His skin was cold. "And I have been meaning to speak to Mrs. Grayson. The staff has become lax. They forget their place. They bother you with their chatter." A stone dropped in Seraphina's stomach. "Mr. Finch was hardly bothering me." "Mr. Finch?" Alistair's eyes narrowed, just for a second. "Ah, the new gardener. Yes. A pity. A pity. He was dismissed this afternoon. Mrs. Grayson found him to be unsuitable. Something about his pruning." Alistair smiled, a slow, terrible smile. "But do not trouble your pretty head about it. I have already arranged for an older, more experienced man to take his place. Your peace is my only concern, my love. My only one." She pulled her hand away. The silver felt icy. The food tasted of ash. He hadn't just dismissed a man for speaking to her. He had done it to show her that he could. He was reminding her that every flower in the garden, every person she spoke to, every breath she took, it all belonged to him. The dismissal of Rowan Finch was a declaration of war. Alistair's control was absolute. Seraphina realized she couldn't escape by simply walking out. She needed an ally. Her lady's maid, Matilda, was a quiet, mousy woman who had been at Blackwood for a decade. She was loyal to the Duke, but she was also, Seraphina sensed, deeply afraid of him. Seraphina's only hope was that Matilda's fear could be leveraged. One night, as Matilda brushed out Seraphina's long hair, Seraphina finally spoke. "Matilda, are you happy here?" The brushing stopped. "It is a good position, Your Grace." "That is not what I asked." Seraphina met the maid's eyes in the mirror. "Are you happy?" Matilda's lower lip trembled. "The Duke is a generous master." "He is a jailer," Seraphina whispered, her voice fierce. "And I am his prisoner, and so are you." This was a terrible risk. If Matilda reported this, Seraphina's few remaining privileges would be gone. But the maid's reaction was not what she expected. A single tear rolled down Matilda's cheek. "My family," Matilda whispered. "They live in one of the Duke's tenant cottages. My brother, he is not well. The Duke pays for the physician." "He buys your silence," Seraphina said, not unkindly, "just as he bought my hand in marriage." She stood up, turning to face the maid. Matilda, I want to leave. I don't want to be the Duchess. I just want to be gone. I have some jewellery, my mother's pearls. They are not the Duke's. They are worth enough to set you and your family up somewhere far from here, far from his reach. Matilda looked torn, her hands wringing in her apron. He would know. He would find you. He finds everyone. Not if I have help. Not if I am clever. Serafina gripped the maid's arms. There is a brewer's wagon that comes every Tuesday. It leaves through the south gate, near the old kitchens. Does Mrs. Grayson inspect it? No, Matilda whispered, her eyes wide with terror and a new, dawning spark of hope. She detests the smell of hops. She has a footman sign the delivery docket. Help me, Matilda, help me, and I will make sure you and your family are free of him forever. Over the next 2 weeks, the plan took shape. Matilda, now a reluctant conspirator, was a font of information. She skimmed small amounts of household money, hiding it for Serafina. She procured a simple, drab dress, the kind a servant would wear. She confirmed the wagon's schedule. The escape was set for the following Tuesday. Alistair was scheduled to meet with his estate manager, a meeting that always lasted for hours. Serafina's heart hammered against her ribs for a week straight. She practiced walking like a servant, her head down. She practiced being invisible. On the eve of the escape, Matilda slipped a note into her hand. Serafina unfolded it in the privacy of her dressing room. It was a crude map, showing a blind spot in the stable yard where she could climb into the wagon undetected. At the bottom, a single sentence was scrawled in a different hand: Godspeed. R.F. Rowan Finch. He hadn't forgotten her. He was still out there, helping her. For the first time in months, Serafina felt a true, burning hope. The prison walls were about to crumble. Part 4. The gilded prison tightens. The morning of the escape was cold and grey. Alistair, blessedly, was in a foul mood, preoccupied with land deeds. He barely glanced at her over breakfast, consumed by his papers. "I will be in the study with Mr. Hardacre all morning," he announced curtly. "Do not have me disturbed." "Of course, Alistair," she murmured, the perfect, placid wife. At 10 o'clock, the appointed time, Serafina changed into the drab grey dress. She bundled her hair under a cap. She tucked the small pouch of money and her mother's pearls into a hidden pocket. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely fasten the buttons. She slipped down the service staircase, her heart a drum against her ribs. She followed the map, through the cold larder, past the wine cellar, and out into the small, cobbled service yard. There it was, the brewer's wagon, smelling strongly of yeast and wet wood. The driver was inside the kitchen, arguing with the cook over the invoice. This was it. She moved quickly, using the blind spot Rowan's map had shown. She hoisted herself up, pulling her skirts in, and burrowed behind a stack of empty casks. She was in. She was in. She bit her lip to keep from crying out in triumph. She was going to be free. She heard the driver return, heard him grunt as he climbed onto his seat. The wagon lurched forward, it rumbled over the cobblestones. She could hear the creak of the south gate opening. And then it stopped. "A moment, Mr. Hobbs," a voice called out, a voice that turned Serafina's blood to ice. "Mrs. Grayson." "An inspection?" the driver grumbled. "You never inspect." "The Duke's orders." The housekeeper's voice was sharp, clipped. "A new policy. We are concerned about theft. You will unload the empty casks. All of them." "But, Mum, this will take an hour." "Then you had best begin." Serafina's breath hitched. No, no, no. She was trapped. She could feel the casks in front of her shifting. There was nowhere to run. A moment later, the cask in front of her was ripped away. She was staring up into the cold, triumphant face of Mrs. Grayson. But it was the person standing behind the housekeeper who truly broke her. It was Matilda. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry, Your Grace," Matilda whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry." "Get her out," Mrs. Grayson snapped. Serafina was pulled from the wagon, her simple dress covered in dust. And there, walking calmly across the yard from the main house, was Alistair. His meeting with the estate manager was, of course, a lie. He looked at her, his face a mask of profound, theatrical sadness. "Oh, Serafina," he said, his voice breaking with false pain. "Why? Why would you do this? After everything I have given you, after all the love I have shown you." He didn't look at the pearls or the money. He only looked at her. "You have broken my heart." He held out his hand, not in anger, but in invitation, as if welcoming a lost child home. "Come," he said gently. "Let us go inside. You are overwrought. You must be chilled to the bone. We will have Agnes draw you a hot bath." "Agnes," Serafina said, her voice numb. "Your new lady's maid," Alistair said, his hand enclosing hers in a grip that was anything but gentle. "Matilda, it seems, has become a bad influence. She has been dismissed. Do not worry," he added, looking at the weeping girl. "I will ensure her family is taken care of." It was a threat, not a promise. As he led her back into the house, Serafina looked back at Matilda, who was being held by 2 footmen. The girl's eyes were a silent scream of terror. The prison hadn't just tightened, it had sealed her in. The map, the ally, the hope, it had all been a test, a cruel, calculated game. And she had failed. The new lady's maid, Agnes, was a gaunt, silent woman who moved with the efficiency of an automaton. She was a perfect extension of Mrs. Grayson. Serafina was now watched, constantly. The doors to her rooms were not locked. Alistair was too clever for such crude theatre. But Agnes slept on a cot at the foot of her bed. There was always a footman stationed in the hall. He called it protecting her from her own melancholy. She called it what it was, solitary confinement. Alistair was more attentive than ever. He read poetry to her in the evenings. He had her portrait commissioned. He sat with her, holding her hand for hours, telling her how much he adored her, how her brief moment of confusion was forgiven, and how they could now truly begin their life together. His love was a suffocating, physical weight. It was a poison. Serafina sank into a state of numb compliance. She played the pianoforte. She let him hold her hand. She smiled when he spoke. But inside, a cold, hard kernel of rage was forming. She had to know why. How had he known? Was it just Matilda? One night, a month into a new, more secure imprisonment, a violent storm rattled the manor. The wind howled, and Agnes, it turned out, was terrified of thunder. A particularly loud crack sent the maid scurrying to the kitchens for a calming draught of brandy. It was the first time Serafina had been alone in weeks. She didn't hesitate. She didn't try to escape the room. She knew that was pointless. Instead, she went straight to Agnes's small, meagre belongings. Tucked beneath the thin mattress of the cot was a small, locked wooden box. It was a simple lock. The hairpin from her own coiffure, which Agnes had not yet taken down, was enough. She twisted the metal. The lock clicked open. Inside there was a stack of coins and letters. They were not from Alistair. They were from Mrs. Grayson. "Agnes, your reports on the Duchess are satisfactory. The Duke is pleased. You will report any conversation, any sigh, any moment of quiet. Her melancholy is a test of your vigilance." But it was the letter at the bottom that made her stop breathing. It was older, dated from before her escape attempt, and it wasn't addressed to Agnes. It was addressed to Matilda. "Matilda, your service in this has been noted. The physician will continue to attend your brother. You will encourage the Duchess. You will accept her stolen money. You will provide her the map from Mr. Finch. You will confirm the wagon. Her hope is essential for the lesson. Her hope was essential for the lesson. Matilda hadn't just been a reluctant traitor. She had been an active participant in the entire charade. And Rowan Finch, the map. He was part of it too. He had been an actor, hired to play the part of a kind gardener, to give her a false sense of hope. The entire escape, from the first kind word from Rowan to Matilda's tearful confession, had been orchestrated by Alistair. He hadn't caught her trying to escape. He had made her try to escape, just so he could prove to her that it was impossible. He needed her to fail. He needed to break her spirit so completely that she would finally accept that his love, his mansion, his life, was the only one she would ever have. Alistair hadn't just built a prison of walls and staff. He had built one of false hope and psychological torture. He wasn't just a controlling husband. He was a monster. She heard Agnes's footsteps in the hall. Serafina locked the box, slid it back under the mattress, and was sitting in her chair, staring into the fire, when the maid returned. The numbness was gone, replaced by an ice-cold fury that burned hotter than any fire. The woman who returned to the manor's grand rooms was not the same one who had been dragged from the brewer's wagon. The terror had been burned out of her, calcified by the ice-cold revelation of the conspiracy. Matilda's betrayal, Rowan's performance, Mrs. Grayson's complicity, all of it orchestrated by Alistair. He had not just caught her. He had built the trap of her escape, baited it with hope, and sprung it himself to prove her powerlessness. That revelation changed the very atoms of her being. Serafina was no longer a prisoner. She was a saboteur. She was a spy in the heart of the enemy's stronghold, and her cage, which had once been her world, was now her hunting ground. She began to play the part he had always wanted, but with a terrifying, newfound commitment. She became the perfect, placid, cured Duchess. When Alistair entered a room, her face would light up with a soft, adoring smile, a performance of such Oscar-worthy brilliance it chilled her own blood. She learned to anticipate his needs, to laugh gently at his dry witticisms, to place her hand over his at dinner with a look of utter contentment. "Oh, Alistair," she murmured one evening, a few weeks after her failed escape. They were in the library, the fire crackling, him reading from a volume of dreadful, self-important philosophy. She rested her head against his shoulder, a gesture she had once despised. "I have been so foolish, so flighty." He stopped reading, his self-satisfaction palpable. "My love? I see it now," she whispered, her voice trembling with practiced sincerity. "I was just frightened of this grand life, frightened of being worthy of your love. When I did that silly thing, I wasn't running from you. I was running from myself." She looked up, her eyes wide and honest. "Can you ever forgive me? I know now. This is my home. You are my only protection." Alistair beamed. It was the radiant, magnanimous smile of a god accepting a flawless sacrifice. He was so consumed by his own narrative, so utterly convinced of his benevolent power, that he believed her without question. He had not just broken her, he had perfected her. "My dearest Serafina," he said, cupping her face, "there is nothing to forgive. You were overwrought. It is forgotten. We can now, truly, begin our life together." The rewards for her performance were immediate. The new Serafina was cured, and therefore no longer needed constant surveillance. Agnes, The gaunt, silent jailer maid was the first to go. "I feel Agnes's presence depresses your spirits, my love," Alistair announced one morning. "She is a creature of duty, not of warmth. I shall return her to Mrs. Grayson's staff. You are well now. You deserve a maid who can speak of fashion and London, not just of starch." He had even, with a flourish, dismissed the footman who had been perpetually stationed in the hall. "My wife is no longer a prisoner of her own melancholy," he declared to Mrs. Grayson, loud enough for Seraphina to hear. "She is the mistress of this house." His trust, born of his monumental arrogance, became her greatest weapon. He began to invite her into his study in the evenings. He, the great Duke, would educate his devoted, simple little wife on the running of his vast empire. He was proud, preening, eager to show her the mechanics of his power. "You see this, Seraphina," he would say, unrolling a map of his northern territories. "This entire valley will be mine by spring. Lord Pembroke believes he has the advantage. He does not know I hold the water rights." He spoke of shipping interests, of land acquisitions, of his rivals in Parliament, whom he was systematically outmaneuvering. And she listened. She sat on a small stool by his desk, her chin in her hand, her eyes full of feigned awe. And she learned. She learned the names of his agents, the locations of his properties, the complex web of his finances. Her final reward was the ultimate key. "My love, this study is a disaster," he said one afternoon, gesturing to his perfectly organized desk. "Mr. Hardacre, my estate manager, is a clod, and Mrs. Grayson is getting old. Her eyes are not sharp." He smiled, a gesture of supreme magnanimity. "I trust your delicate hand. Would you do me the honor of keeping my papers tidy? It would be a great comfort to know that you are the only one who touches them." He had just given her the key to his kingdom. For weeks, she performed her new duty with the diligence of a nun. She spent long, silent afternoons in his study. The room smelled of old paper, lemon oil, and his expensive smoky cologne. She dusted his books. She organized his papers. She was the perfect, mindless little wife. But as she organized, she read. Most of it was, as he'd said, the boring business of a great estate. Tenant rosters, crop reports, land deeds from Yorkshire, shipping manifests from Liverpool. But as she filed, she memorized. She saw the discrepancies. She saw a shipping company named Croft & Co. that seemed to handle an unusual volume of French imports, brandy and silks, despite the near-constant state of war. She saw payments to men with no titles and no land, recorded under discretionary household expenses. She was learning to read the language of his power. But she knew the real secrets, the personal ones, were kept elsewhere. Her eyes were drawn, every day, to the bottom drawer on the right side of his desk. It was the only one he never opened in front of her. It was the only one that was always locked. The key, small and ornate, was attached to his heavy gold watch chain, the one he never took off. It became her obsession. She watched the key swing from his waistcoat. She saw him unlock the drawer in the mornings before she entered, and lock it again in the evenings before he left. What was inside? What secret was so precious that his adoring, cured wife could not be trusted with it? She waited. The patience she had learned as a prisoner served her well as a spy. The opportunity came on a Tuesday. Alistair had received word of a triumphant political victory in London. A rival, Robert Pembroke, the Duke of Ashworth, had been defeated on a trade bill. Alistair was jubilant, and his jubilation led to a rare indulgence. At dinner, he drank. He drank fine claret with the meal, and then, in his study, he moved to the port. He toasted his own genius. He toasted Seraphina, his greatest prize. He drank and he boasted, and she sat with him, nursing a single glass, smiling and encouraging him, refilling his glass when it emptied. By 11 o'clock, he was incoherent. By midnight, he was asleep, slumped deep in his high-backed leather chair, his breathing heavy and rattling in the silent room. He was a mountain of a man, dead to the world. And on the polished mahogany table beside him, glinting in the dying firelight, was his watch chain. He had unhooked it, complaining of the weight, and tossed it down. Her heart, which she thought had turned to stone, began to hammer. She didn't move for a full 5 minutes. She just watched him. His chest rose and fell. He was truly, deeply asleep. She rose from her stool, her stockinged feet making no sound on the thick Persian carpet. The house was tomblessly quiet. She reached the table. Her hand was steady. There was no tremor, no fear. Only cold, electric purpose. She lifted the heavy gold chain. The links were warm from his body. The small, intricate key felt heavy, weighted with significance. She moved to the desk. She knelt. Her hands, which had trembled so badly in the brewer's wagon, were now the steady hands of a surgeon. She slid the key into the lock. It was oiled and turned with a smooth, near-silent click that seemed to echo in the room like a gunshot. She pulled the drawer open. It slid out, revealing its contents. It was not a chaotic mess. It was as organized as the rest of his mind. There were 2 items. The first was a slim, practical-looking bank book, bound in plain black leather, with the name Child and Cobses embossed in small gold letters. His private bank. The second was bound in dark, rich red leather. It was not a ledger. It was a journal. Her hand went to the journal. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was it. This was the heart of the monster. She opened it. The pages were thick, creamy vellum, and the handwriting was his. Neat, precise, utterly controlled. The first entry was dated almost 2 years ago. May 1st. Attended the Ashworth ball this evening. A tedious affair, until I saw her. Miss Seraphina Harrington, the daughter of that fool, the Baron. She has skin like porcelain and an air of untouched innocence. She is the perfect canvas. She will be mine. Seraphina's blood ran cold. She felt the bile rise in her throat. She read on, turning the pages, her breath held tight in her chest. It was a meticulous, chilling account of his plan. He hadn't just met her, he had targeted her. May 15th. Investigated the father, Lord Harrington. Just as I suspected. A fool, a gambler, and deep in debt to every card table at White's. This will be simple. June 3rd. Engaged the services of Mr. Silas Croft and Mr. Thomas Vance. Gentlemen of opportunity, one might say. Their instructions are clear. Find their way to White's. Encourage the Baron's habits. My funds are at their disposal. The cost is irrelevant. She read on, entry after entry, for over a year. It was a diary of her family's destruction. He had chronicled it all. July 10th. Harrington lost the Kent property. Excellent. He is becoming frantic. September 2nd. He is desperate. The creditors are at his door. The time approaches. I shall arrange an accidental meeting. October 29th. Met with the Baron today. He was a broken man. He wept, pathetic. I made my offer, to pay all his debts, to save his name. His gratitude was nauseating. November 1st. He has agreed. The price, of course, is his daughter. She closed the book. Her body was shaking, but not with fear. It was a vibration of pure, unadulterated rage. His love wasn't just a prison. It was a trap, a meticulously built snare, baited and set long before she had ever laid eyes on him. He hadn't saved her from ruin. He had engineered her ruin. He was not her savior. He was the architect of her family's every sorrow, the puppet master who had pulled the strings of their disgrace. He hadn't just seen her and wanted her. He had hunted her. She sat there, in the dark, in his chair, the cold leather ledger in her lap. She looked at the man snoring in the opposite chair, the god of her world, reduced to a drunken, sleeping mortal. Her hands were steady. She placed the journal back in the drawer. She placed the bank book beside it. She locked the drawer. She walked to the table and looped the watch chain precisely as it had been before. She did not go to her room. She did not weep. She sat back down, opposite her husband, and watched the embers of the fire die, one by one. The numbness was gone. The cold fury was gone. In its place was a sharp, brilliant, and terrible clarity. He had documented his sin, and she, in her weeks of tidying, had learned the landscape of his entire empire. She had read the other ledgers, the boring ones, the ones detailing his shipping, his taxes, his illicit trade. She had come to the study looking for a secret, and she had found an arsenal. The red journal was his motive. The other ledgers, she now realized, would be the weapon. His arrogance, his need to document his every triumph, private and public, would be his downfall. She just had to aim the cannon and light the fuse. The house was silent, but it was a new kind of silence. It was not the oppressive, watchful quiet Alistair commanded. It was the heavy, breathless hush of a battlefield before the charge. Seraphina stood by the fireplace, in the grand drawing room, the room he loved most. It was a monument to his wealth and taste, all gilded moulding and sapphire blue silk. She had requested a fire, and the flames cast leaping, agitated shadows across her face. She was dressed for dinner in a gown of deep crimson velvet. It felt appropriate, the color of blood, the color of rage. She had spent the afternoon in a state of chilling clarity. The numbness was gone. The terror was gone. In their place was a cold, pure fury that had sharpened her mind to a razor's edge. She had sent her letters. She had made her plans. And now there was only the waiting. She had dispatched Agnes, the silent jailer maid, with a message for her husband. Please inform the Duke that I have a surprise for him. I shall await him in the drawing room before we dine. Agnes had given her an odd, suspicious look. The Duchess did not summon. She waited, but Seraphina's tone, devoid of its usual tremor, had been an order, not a request. The maid had scurried off, a pawn who didn't even know the game was ending. Seraphina heard his footsteps in the marble hall long before the door opened. They were unhurried, confident. The sound of a man who owned the very floorboards he walked on. The doors opened. Alistair stood there, magnificent in his evening attire. He smiled, that familiar, indulgent smile that had once charmed her and now sickened her. It was the smile of a man looking at a prized, beautiful, and slightly stupid possession. "My love," he said, his voice a smooth baritone. He walked toward her, his eyes appreciating the picture she made by the fire. "Agnes said you had a surprise for me. Have you mastered that difficult sonata by Mr. Clementi? I would be delighted to hear it." He was so predictable, so utterly convinced of her smallness. "No, Alistair," she said. Her voice did not shake. It was as cold and clear as the January air outside. "I have not learned a new song." On the table between them, half hidden in the shadows cast by the candelabra, was a single object. A book, bound in dark red leather. Alistair's smile did not vanish. It froze. It became a brittle, perfect mask, while his eyes, those loving, gentle eyes, turned to chips of slate. He had not expected this. This was not in his script. "Where?" he said, and the velvet was gone from his voice. It was raw, dangerous. "Did you get that?" "From your study," Serafina replied, her gaze locked on his. "From the bottom drawer, the one you keep locked." She allowed herself a small, bitter smile. "You drank too much port last night. You're becoming careless in your old age." He didn't move. He simply stared at the book as if it were a serpent. "You have no right," he whispered. "No right?" Serafina's laugh was a sharp, ugly sound. "I have every right. I have the right of the condemned to know the nature of her executioner." She stepped to the table and laid her hand on the ledger's cover. "I read it, Alistair. All of it." She opened the book. The firelight illuminated the neat, precise script. His handwriting. "Such interesting acquaintances for a duke," she said, her voice dripping with mock curiosity. "A Mr. Silas Croft, a Mr. Thomas Vance. Such common names. Tell me, Alistair, do they play a fair game of cards, or are they only fair when their pockets are lined with a duke's gold?" He took a step toward her, his face a mask of thunder. "You do not understand the world of men, Serafina. Those are business dealings. They are beyond your comprehension." "Oh, I comprehend them perfectly," she shot back, her voice rising with the force of her stored-up hatred. "I comprehend the payments. I comprehend the dates. I comprehend the meticulous, patient, vile plan to ruin a good man, simply because you wanted his daughter." She slammed the book shut. "You destroyed my father. You didn't just happen upon him at his lowest ebb. You created his lowest ebb. You hired those card sharps from the stews of Covent Garden. You sent them into White's, a place they never would have entered, and you told them to encourage his habits. You bled him dry, coin by coin, debt by debt, all so you could sweep in like a savior. Like a god." She was breathing hard, the words tumbling out, a torrent of accusation. "All those months, your kindness to my family, your concern for our name, your generous offer to pay his debts. It was a lie, a performance. You didn't save my family. You drove the carriage off the cliff and then demanded a reward for pulling us from the wreckage." Alistair's face had gone pale, but not with guilt, with fury. It was the outrage of a deity whose plans had been questioned by a mortal. "I gave you everything," he roared, and the mask of civility was not just cracked, it was shattered, ground to dust beneath his boot. He swept his arm across the table, sending a priceless Ming vase crashing to the floor. It exploded in a spray of porcelain. "I gave you this house, a title, wealth beyond your father's most drunken dreams. I saved your name from being dragged through the mud of debtor's prison, from being synonymous with ruin and shame. And this is the thanks I get?" He advanced on her, his eyes blazing. "You, a penniless girl from a failing line, dare to question thy methods? I did what was necessary to secure you. I saw you at the Ashworth ball, and I knew you would be mine. I move the world as I see fit, Serafina, and I saw fit to have you. You should be on your knees, thanking me for the rest of your life that I chose you." "Thank you," Serafina laughed, a wild, terrible sound. "Thank you for what? For this gilded prison? For this life of suffocating, silent observation? You don't love me, Alistair. You own me. You talk of love, but it is just obsession. It is the pride of a collector who has acquired a rare painting and will not let anyone else see it. You didn't just want a wife. You wanted a bird with broken wings, one that would sing only for you. And when I tried to fly, you had your servants, Your spies. Trap me and bring me back. You staged my escape just to prove you could. His face contorted. He had never been spoken to this way. He, the Duke of Blackwood, the master of all he surveyed. You are my wife, Seraphina, he hissed, the words of venomous promise. He lunged, not to strike her, but to grab her. He seized her upper arms, his fingers digging into the velvet, bruising the flesh beneath. You are the Duchess of Blackwood, and you will learn gratitude. I will teach you, if I must. You will learn your place. She stared into his eyes, unflinching, even as tears of pain welled. No, you won't. He had been so consumed by his own rage, so blinded by his monologue, he hadn't seen where she had been backing up. He hadn't noticed that her free hand was now inches from the heavy, tasseled bell pulled by the mantelpiece. Not the simple cord for a servant, but the emergency bell, the one reserved for fire, for intruders, for Armageddon within the house. He raised his free hand, his palm open. For the first time, she knew, with absolute certainty, he was going to strike her. The final line would be crossed. Her hand shot out and yanked the bell pull with all her strength. Alistair froze, his hand in mid-air. A violent, clanging peal echoed through the manor. It was a sound no one had ever heard. It was a scream. It was an alarm. It shattered the sacred, oppressive quiet of Blackwood. "What have you done?" he whispered, his grip tightening, his face a mask of disbelief. "I have done," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "What I should have done months ago. I have raised the alarm." Footsteps, thundering, panicked in the hall. The drawing-room doors burst open so hard they slammed against the walls. Mrs. Grayson stood there, her face as white as her apron, flanked by Agnes and two tall, strong footmen, Robert and Thomas. "Your Grace, my lord, what is it? A fire!" Mrs. Grayson cried, her eyes wide, taking in the scene, the shattered vase, the Duke's hand raised to his wife, his other hand gripping her arms in a brutal hold, the Duchess's crimson dress and terrified, tear-streaked face. He struck me!" Seraphina screamed, collapsing in his grip as if her legs had given way. It was a performance, a desperate, brilliant piece of theatre, fueled by a core of genuine terror. "He's gone mad!" He was raving, shouting about killing my father. He said he destroyed him. He said he'd kill me. Alistair stared at her, his expression one of pure, unadulterated shock. He had been so used to controlling every narrative, he had never imagined she could create her own. He had always painted her as melancholic, as fragile. Now, he had made her hysterical, and he had given her the perfect audience. "She is lying," Alistair bellowed, finally releasing her to point a damning finger. "She is hysterical. She's unwell. Seize her. Take her to her room and lock the door." But the staff hesitated. It was only for a second, but it was a second of mutiny. They had seen his rages before. They had lived under his iron rule. They had enforced his suffocating kindness. But they had never seen this. They had never seen the master of the house with his hand raised, his face purpled with rage, and the mistress of the house accusing him of madness and murder. "My lord," Mrs. Grayson began, her voice trembling for the first time in Seraphina's memory. She had been his most loyal soldier, but even she had a limit. And the sight of her master, completely undone, railing like a madman, had found it. Perhaps you should retire, my lord. You are not well." He had lost them. In one single, uncontrolled moment, he had lost his army. His perfect, loyal staff had seen the mask drop, and the face beneath it had terrified them. "Get out," he whispered, his voice deadly calm, which was so much more frightening than his rage. "All of you, get out!" They fled. They were his servants, after all. Their brief rebellion was over. Agnes didn't even look back. Mrs. Grayson cast one last, terrified glance at Seraphina, then pulled the doors shut. The silence that fell was absolute. He and Seraphina were alone again. Alistair slowly turned to face her. The rage was gone, replaced by something cold and final. He was a god no longer. He was a predator, cornered, and all the more deadly for it. "You," he said, breathing hard as he straightened his cuffs, a pathetic attempt to regain his dignity. "You will pay for that. A performance worthy of Drury Lane. But the show is over. You will spend the rest of your life in the North Wing. You will have one room, and Agnes will be your only visitor. You will never see the sun again. You will be my mad wife in the attic, Seraphina. A story I tell to my guests. A tragedy." He began to walk toward her, his steps slow, measured. This was the end. "No, Alistair," she said, backing away until she hit the cold marble of the mantelpiece. "I won't." He almost smiled. "And who will stop me? Your staff? They are gone. Who is left to save you?" As if in answer, a sound came from the front of the house. Not the panicked running of servants, but a heavy, official thudding on the great oak and iron front door. It was a sound of authority, a sound that did not ask for entry, but demanded it. Alistair froze. He looked from Seraphina to the drawing-room doors. A muffled shout came from the hall. The drawing-room doors burst open again. This time it was not the staff. It was two imposing men in heavy wool coats, their faces stern and unimpressed. They were followed by a man Seraphina recognized instantly from her brief time in London society. The Duke of Ashworth, Robert Pembroke. He was Alistair's most bitter political and social rival, a man whose integrity was as famous as Alistair's wealth. Alistair stared, his carefully constructed world collapsing in on him. "Pembroke, what is the meaning of this? This is my home. How dare you trespass?" "It's your grace to you, Blackwood," Ashworth said, his voice as cold as a crypt. "And it's not a trespass when one is invited. Not by you, I admit, but by the Duchess." He nodded curtly to Seraphina. "Your Grace, I am glad we arrived in time." "These gentlemen," Ashworth continued, gesturing to the two men, "are from the Bow Street Magistrate's office. This is Mr. Field." "Alistair Harrington, Duke of Blackwood," Mr. Field said, his voice a low growl, utterly unmoved by the title. He held up a thick piece of folded paper. "I have in my hand a warrant from the Chief Magistrate for your immediate arrest." "Arrest?" Alistair's voice was a strangled squawk. "On what charge? The word of this mad woman?" He pointed at Seraphina. "She is unwell. She has been fabricating stories. You cannot believe a word she says." "We don't have to believe her word. Your Grace," Mr. Field said, his lip curling at the title, "though her testimony will be most compelling. No, we are here on charges of tax evasion, willful fraud against the Crown, and smuggling." Alistair's face, which had been pale with rage, now turned a sickly, ashen grey. He looked at Seraphina, not with hatred, not with anger, but with a dawning, horrified comprehension. She was no longer cowering. She was standing tall, her back straight against the mantelpiece. "You," he breathed. "I wrote to him," Seraphina said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the silence of the room. "I wrote to a lot of people. I sent them pages from your ledgers, Alistair. You see, the red one, the one about my father, that was just the beginning. That was your private sin. She pointed to the desk in the corner. But your public ones were so much more interesting. The ones in your study. The shipping manifests you so cleverly falsified to avoid the Crown's taxes. The accounts from Drummond's bank showing payments to French merchants in Calais. Smuggling French brandy is so very profitable, isn't it? And so very treasonous when we are at war. She had done more than find the secret of her own ruin. She had found the secret of his. The ledger about her father had been the bait. His true, arrestable crimes were the trap. "She is a liar," Alistair shouted, his voice cracking. "A forgery. You have no proof." "We don't need her proof," Mr. Field said, stepping forward. He was enjoying this. "We have the word of your shipping agent in Dover, a Mr. Ephraim Croft, cousin to Silas, I believe. He was more than happy to provide the original ledgers in exchange for immunity from the gallows. Seems his loyalty to his duke was somewhat less than his fear of the noose." The officer nodded to his partner. "Take him." The two men moved, efficient and strong. They seized Alistair's arms, the same arms that had held Seraphina captive moments before. "No!" he screamed. It was not a roar. It was a pathetic, terrified wail. He was a god no longer. He was just a criminal. He twisted, trying to look at Seraphina. "Seraphina, my love, you can't. I did it for you. I did it all for you. Tell them. Seraphina, please." It was his last, desperate attempt to invoke the love he had used as a weapon for so long. Seraphina stared at him, her face a mask of cold, hard pity. She watched as the man who had controlled her every breath, who had built a prison of kindness and terror, was held fast by the law. She walked past him, toward the Duke of Ashworth, who held out his arm. She placed her hand on it. She didn't even look back as the Bow Street officers began to march her husband from the room, his pathetic pleas for her to save him, echoing off the high, gilded ceiling. At the door, she paused. She turned, looking at him one last time. He was framed in the doorway, a broken man, his world in ashes. "You said I would spend the rest of my life in one room, Alistair," she said, her voice carrying across the space between them. "That I would never see the sun again." She took a breath, the first truly free breath she had taken in a year. "I believe it is you who will not be seeing the sun again." She turned and, on the arm of the Duke of Ashworth, walked out of the drawing room, out of the dark, silent hall, and out the great front doors into the cold, clean, and liberating night air. The prison was broken. The warden was in chains, and the Duchess of Blackwood was, at long last, simply Seraphina. She never looked back. Seraphina Harrington, the woman they tried to break, became a symbol of something far greater than a duchess. She testified against Alistair, and her calm, factual, and devastating account of his crimes, both financial and emotional, ensured he would never see the outside of Newgate Prison again. The story of the Duke's love prison became a whispered legend in London, a terrifying reminder that the most beautiful cages are often the most dangerous. Seraphina, with her father's name cleared and her own small fortune secured from the wreckage of Alistair's estate, didn't just survive. She thrived. She became a patron for women who, like her, had been trapped by circumstance, turning her pain into power. What did you think of Seraphina's incredible story of survival? Did you suspect Matilda's betrayal or the horrifying truth about her father's ruin? This story shows that the strongest prisons aren't made of stone, but of lies and obsessive love. If you were moved by Seraphina's fight for freedom, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of resilience. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another real-life drama. Thank you for listening.